Good evening. Good evening, everybody in cyberspace. It's an extraordinary evening because I don't know whether I could be talking to one person. I could be having a kind of Louis Theroux at home with Sophie Hannah, or I could be talking to over 24 million people around the world who have signed out from their Taylor Swift YouTube accounts to be with us tonight. But luckily, my 7-year-old son has just shown me that there are a number of people listening. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here this evening. My name is Julian. I'm unemployed, but in between trips to the supermarket in a mask, I occasionally get to read and record audiobooks, and I've had the privilege and the honour of recording a number of Sophie Hannah's Poirot books, which is one of the reasons I'm here this evening. So I'm delighted to welcome you here to the launch of this book. Of course, what we should be doing is sidling in to an impossibly chic and cool independent bookstore, perhaps like Daunt Books in Marylebone High Street, well within 1 metre of each other, champagne glasses chinking together, hoping to spot Sophie Hannah across the crowd and other literary cognoscenti. But we can't do that. But I did think there are quite a few pluses about doing it this way, which is that, first of all, you can all relax in the comfort and privacy of your own home. You can nip down to Tesco and get some super strength cider, which is a lot cheaper. You don't worry about missing the bus on the way home. You can cut your toenails. And if you get bored and think it's all a bit tedious, you can just log out and no one will be any the wiser. So in a way, there's a lot going for this. And I'm going to make it as short and sweet as possible. So let me start by welcoming Sophie Hannah. This is the launch of the new, her latest Poirot continuation novel, as it's described.
Yes.
The Killings at Kingfisher Hill. And I must thank also our hosts for tonight, who are the Institute of Continuing Education, something that is slightly in the balance at the moment, but I believe will continue in September. So thank you to them. And I'm going to welcome Sophie and let you have a word before we plunge into our questions.
Yes, well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming. And well, first of all, I just want to say, Julian, I was so thrilled when I heard that you were willing to come and do this, because ever since the first book, but building up with each book, I get so many emails from people saying that they've listened to the audiobooks and that they love your narration so much. And more people are buying the books in audio because they just think you're absolutely amazing. And I think you're absolutely amazing. So a huge thank you, because you've now been Inspector Catchpool 4 times.
Extraordinary. I must be due a promotion soon.
Yeah, superintendent for sure. Yeah, so you know now you have to be him forever. If I write any more Poirot novels, I'm relying on you to narrate them.
Brilliant. Before we start the questions I'm going to ask you tonight and hear more about the book, there is a little bit of housekeeping to do, as they say at these meetings. And I need to tell everyone who's listening in that you can actually order a signed, not just signed, but dedicated copy of The Killings at Kingfisher Hill from the aforementioned Daunt Books. And there will be a link in the confirmation email that everybody got before coming tonight. So have a look at that. And also later on this evening, just to lure you in further, there will be my first ever virtual raffle. We'll be choosing 3 lucky participants who will win a signed and leather-bound special edition of Sophie's previous Poirot novel, The Mystery of Three Quarters. On its own, fairly worthless, but imagine sitting and leafing along while you listen to my audio book reading of that book, and you can follow along and see all the mistakes I've made. So that's worth holding on for. questions. I've got a few little questions to kick off with, and Sophie's going to tell us more about the book. And everyone listening is, of course, welcome to send in via the Q&A function onto the screen any thoughts or questions they have. And our wonderful behind-the-scenes moderator, Corey, will be dealing with those and hopefully getting them to Sophie during the course of the evening. Are you happy for me to ask you the first question?
I am. And also, if
Yes.
we have time, I've got a couple of little questions that I wouldn't mind asking you. Since I've got this opportunity to chat to you and you've narrated all the books, yes, I would like to ask you a few, nothing taxing.
No.
Yeah.
How did that ginger idiot do such a bad Belgian accent and manage to get an audio book? Extraordinary. Good. Well, let's kick off before anybody logs out. Sophie, many congratulations. The 4th Poirot novel, The Killings at Kingfisher Hill. Can you tell us a little bit about the new Poirot mystery? How did you come to write these continuations of that great legacy?
Okay, well, I'll answer that one first, and then I'll tell you about The Killings at Kingfisher Hill. So how I came to write the books was all really due to a coincidence of timing. My literary agent was at a meeting at HarperCollins, and the meeting was nothing to do with me or my books and nothing to do with Agatha Christie or her books. It was a completely unrelated meeting involving one of my agent's other clients. But while he was in that room, his mind started to wander, and he remembered that HarperCollins publish all of Agatha Christie's backlist. And he also remembered that I'm a massive Agatha Christie fan. And so he interrupted what was supposed to be the proper business of the meeting and said, hey, you guys publish Agatha Christie. I've got a client who's a massive fan. Why don't you commission her to write new Christie brand novels? And HarperCollins said, no, the family would never want anything like that to happen. And then the very next day, literally the next day, that same HarperCollins editor, David, who had been in the meeting and who had said no to my agent, he had a meeting with the Christie family to discuss Agatha publishing projects. And at that meeting, the Christie family told David that they had decided, after many years of thinking they didn't want any new books, that maybe actually they did. At which point David said, oh, that's a strange coincidence. I had this agent in my office yesterday who reckons he's got the perfect author, and it all went from there. So like total serendipity is how it came about. So yeah, The Killings at Kingfisher Hill is the 4th one. And it starts when Poirot and his sidekick, Edward Catchpole, who's a Scotland Yard inspector, they are on their way from London via luxury passenger coach to a very exclusive and posh country estate, a gated sort of second home community in the leafy English countryside. And the reason they're going there is because Poirot has been summoned by a chap called Richard Devonport, who very much does not want his fiancée to be hanged, as she is imminently about to be, for a murder that he is convinced she didn't commit. So that's why Poirot and Catchpole are on their way to Kingfisher Hill. But as soon as they board the coach, they notice a woman acting very strangely. And after about 10 minutes of the journey, she leaps up out of her seat and says, somebody has to swap seats with me, because if I sit in that seat for any longer, I will be murdered. So that's how it all sort of kicks off. And I won't say too much more about the plot because I don't want to give too many spoilers. But obviously Catchpole thinks this is strange. Here we are off to Kingfisher Hill to look into a murder scenario. And on the coach, there's somebody shouting about murder. And why on earth would she think that if she stays in that seat, she will be murdered? And so the mysteries are piling on thick and fast from the first chapter, really.
And I must say, when I read those books, one of the great things, like the originals, is there's always a fantastic, perfect little scene that sets the scene at the very beginning. And this one is no exception. Everybody huddling in the cold, waiting to get on this charabang. Catchpole doesn't know why he's been called there. What is he doing? The cold February mist, and then this lady's behaving so strangely. It's a great beginning, isn't it, that draws you in. Superb, superb.
And as I say, that's a trademark Agatha Christie thing. Like, so many of her books start with a mystery or a mysterious scenario that is actually so much more mysterious than usual. Because instead of it just being, here's a murdered dead body, now let's work out who killed the dead body, and that's a scenario where you can imagine any number of possible answers, Agatha liked to start with intriguing, mysterious scenarios where actually the reader could not even begin to imagine what might be going on. And because you can't imagine, like, I literally can't think of any reason why this would ever happen, then you have to read on, because clearly it's happening, and so there must be an explanation. So yeah, and that was, you know, something I did in all my crime novels, even before I wrote Poirot novels, and I got that directly from Agatha, because it's one of the things I love about her books.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, in the heart of these novels, the originals and your own, there's always a brilliant and clever idea that's then unravelled and revealed at the heart of it. Where do you get your ideas from, these amazing labyrinthine ideas that unlock?
Well, the truth is that they just appear in my head, and I don't know how or why they do, but they appear in different ways. So for the first two Poirot novels, The Monogram Murders and Closed Casket, the first idea that came to me for each of those was the ending, actually. Like, I pictured Poirot saying, you know, you all thought it was this. Well, in the case of The Monogram Murders, it was like, you all thought this must be what was going on. Actually, this was what was going on. That was for The Monogram Murders. And I thought of that ending, that denouement scene first, and then I had to work back and work out what Poirot was explaining. What was the crime? Who were the characters? With Closed Casket, I also thought of the ending first, and in that instance, the ending was what I thought was just an amazing and ingenious motive for murder. And with The Mystery of Three Quarters, the first idea I had was for the beginning. So that opening weird scenario of four people seeking out Poirot and saying, why have you sent me a letter accusing me of murder? And Poirot learns that somebody has been sending out these letters accusing these four people of murder and accusing them all of the same murder. And he knows nothing about it. The letters are not from him. So for those three, those were the first ideas that I got. With Killings at Kingfisher Hill, I had actually planned a completely different plot and had it approved by my editor. And then one day I just woke up and realized that I had the entire story and all the characters for a completely different novel in my head. And I just knew that that was my fourth Poirot novel. I was just like, this has just been given to me as if by magic. I'm writing this, because it just felt so fully formed, and it was just all there, every detail of the plot and everything. So yeah, it's weird. I don't know where it all comes from, but I think what's probably happening is, because for pretty much my entire adult life, my brain has known that its really only serious job is to come up with ingenious crime novel ideas. And so it just quietly gets to work and subconsciously sort of tests things out, and then only lets me become aware of them when it thinks it's got a serious contender. But I don't know. It is weird. The ideas do just seem to appear.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'm going to stop it now, and instead of asking my next question, I'm going to pretend that I'm terribly experienced and have done this before, and I'm going to effortlessly flick my eyes over to the Q&A box and say that Griselda from Indonesia has sent a message, and she said that she's a big fan, and she's studying in the UK, and she's wondering about how you select the names of your supporting characters. She's obviously a big fan. She's thinking about naming her children later either Catchpool or Sylvia Rule, which is yeah. So thank you for that question. Yes, how do you come up with these exotic names, or do they just come to you?
Well, actually, I mean, I don't think they're particularly exotic. What I did certainly for the first two, absolutely all of the names, apart from Poirot, came from a disused cemetery very near my house in Cambridge, Mill Road Cemetery, which is now a dog walking park. and I have a dog, he will probably make an appearance at some point and bark loudly. And so I walk my dog in that cemetery, and I started to notice just after I'd been asked to write the first Poirot novel that so many of the gravestones had names on them which just felt like something out of a 1920s or 30s detective novel. They had that sort of period feel to them. So Catchpool was one. I don't think Sylvia Rule was, actually, because by the third novel, I'd used up most of the names in the graveyard. But certainly, you know, Catchpool and all the names from the Monogram murders, Sipple, Negus, I can't remember the others now, and the same with Close Basket.
There's a range.
Kimpton.
There's a range of deceased people in the Cambridge area who have been forever immortalised in literature now.
Yeah, well, I do sometimes think if anyone had read my Poirot novels and had a good memory and then took their dog for a walk in Mill Road Cemetery, they might get a bit of a shock, because it is literally like walking through a list of my... I mean, I don't know whether you remember in Closed Casket, the old lady whose house the murder happens in is called Lady Athelinda Playford. And both of those names, though separately, came from gravestones in Mill Road Cemetery. So that's where those names came from. And then for the later two novels, I had to work a bit harder, because for some reason other cemeteries aren't as good, especially Welsh ones where everyone's called Jones or Evans. So they're not much use. No, I just, wherever I go, I sort of, I guess, keep one ear peeled for interesting surnames. So Devonport, for example, in the killings at Kingfisher Hill, I think I noticed somebody on Twitter whose surname was Devonport, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because you'd expect the name to be Davenport, but actually Devonport. Tell
me about it. I think I said Davenport about 300 times while I was recording your book, and then had to keep correcting myself.
Oh, no.
It's Devonport.
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I also like to get... It's so weird, until I've got the name right, I just, I couldn't ever think, oh, well, that name will do. And I don't know what makes a difference, but when I thought of Devonport, I was like, yes, that's the surname. Oh, and the Laviolettes, there's a couple in the killings at Kingfisher Hill, an American couple called Mr. and Mrs. Laviolette. They were actually not, the characters are not based on the real people, but I did an event where I met a lovely American couple called Mr. and Mrs. Laviolette. And when they introduced themselves to me, the first thing I said was, I am putting your surname in a Poirot novel. And they were very excited about that.
They'll be delighted. That's brilliant, brilliant. Now, my next question, but I'm going to pop in a little extra question here from one of our attendees, is what do you think have been the most enjoyable aspects and the biggest challenges of recreating this iconic character, tackling this guy? And a great supplementary question from Sior, who's written in, saying, I love your books. Have you ever thought of writing a Miss Marple?
Mm-hmm. I've thought of it a lot. In fact, I think of it nearly constantly, because people ask me all the time, wouldn't you like to write a Miss Marple? Go on, write a Miss Marple. And I would love to write a Miss Marple, but I also strongly feel that I never should. And that is really unusual for me. 99% of things I fancy doing, I decide I should do them. This has caused me some problems over the course of my life, but that is my normal policy. But with regard to writing a Miss Marple, I just feel that since I'm doing Poirot novels, it would kind of be too much somehow to also take on Miss Marple. It would feel somehow inappropriate, and I can't really explain it beyond that. I very much hope somebody one day is asked to write new Miss Marple novels, and because I would love to read some. And so though I am tempted, I don't feel I should do it. What was the other part of the question?
The other part was about what it was like to face the challenge of recreating this iconic character. What was the most enjoyable parts of that?
The most enjoyable part for me always is, this is going to sound hugely pretentious, but it's the part that I call the story architecture. Other people might call it planning. But to me, that sounds like deciding where to put a roundabout in Bracknell city centre. So I call it story architecture. That whole process of like, you have one great idea, and then you go, okay, I've got one great idea and no others. Where do I go from here? And then you think, okay, well, what if this happened? And no, that won't work because of this. So what if that happened? All of that, working out the plot and the story, and the kind of like anticipating which parts will make the reader think, what the heck? And then anticipating the reader going, oh, of course, at the end. So all of that I just love. I guess the most challenging part actually is, before I start to write each one, I always have a moment where I think, what if I've somehow lost the ability to write like someone from 1931? And that was my biggest worry before I started writing the first one. I was like, how do I know that I even can write a book set in 1930? I mean, I don't know anything about 1930. History is not my strong point. All I remember from my school days in terms of things I learnt in history was the name Bismarck. I literally don't know much apart from Bismarck, and I don't even remember who he was. So like the thought that I would have to write convincingly in the voice of a police inspector from 1929 was quite daunting. But weirdly, I did all my preparation, so I reread all of Agatha's books from that period. And then when I sat down, I thought to myself, you'll either be able to do this or you won't. And after writing the first chapter, I thought, sort of feel as if it's going okay. And ever since then, it's been fine. But I do always have that thing of, okay, I'm going into a slightly different mode, whereas my other crime novels are contemporary, and I know I can write in a contemporary voice because I am contemporary. So I would say that's the biggest challenge. And then the other challenge that I just always have is that I always kind of beat myself up about the fact that in an ideal world, I would like to have a leisurely 2 years to write each book in. Because of the way I organise my life and I do lots of things, I never do have that leisurely 2 years, which probably isn't a problem actually, because it makes me work much more efficiently. But I think I fairly foolishly spend the time that I am writing the book thinking, this is the wrong way to write a book. And of course, that's probably not true, right? Because the book gets written and it's all fine. Yes. But I do sort of have this fantasy of like, one day I'll be able to just write 500 words a day and have a day off when I feel like it. But what actually happens is, whenever I'm writing a book, I've usually got a much shorter time scale. And so it's kind of like a bit adrenaline-y, which I guess I probably like on one level. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep making that happen. But that's challenging as well, thinking this has to be brilliant and it has to be finished by next week.
It's a big task you set yourself with that incredible character. It's 100 years this year, I believe, of Agatha Christie being in print.
Yes,
and it appears
Niles is 100 years old. Yeah.
So, and she appears to be just as popular and extraordinary and relevant as she was when she started. It's a silly question, but what have you noticed in your extensive research and analysis and fandom of Agatha in her stories that have really stood the test of time and marked her out?
Well, I mean, I still think she is the best. I feel, it sounds kind of a bit overly simplistic, but she just is the best. So that's like one reason I think for it. And I obviously also think that like her subject matter is subject matter that doesn't date. It's like human nature. Yes. The ways in which human beings manage to contrive to cause misery and suffering for themselves and other people, that is her specialist subject. And she's so psychologically wise and insightful. So all of that means that when people read her stories now, they don't feel dated because we have all the same neuroses and undercurrents and jealousies and pettinesses that people had in the 20s and 30s. But I think more than anything, actually, the things that are super popular and enduringly popular are the things that loads of people always fancy doing. So like, chocolate, for example, is popular and probably always will be, because so many people always fancy eating chocolate, whereas fewer people always fancy eating asparagus, say. Even though I actually always do fancy eating asparagus, but I'm a weird case. But so the thing I really notice every time I read and reread Agatha is that whatever mood you're in, you can be stressed to the gills, like running for a train, worrying about getting to parents' evening on time, and in no fit state to read any other book, and you always fancy reading an Agatha Christie. You start reading and you go, ooh, and it's kind of Moorish, and you just fancy carrying on. And there are other writers I've read that is true of. I think the same is true of Enid Blyton. I think the same is true of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books. Those are the ones that immediately spring to mind. But I think that is the thing Agatha really has. You just, everyone who loves her work, they want to read and reread it endlessly, and whatever mood they're in, it's always the right mood to read Agatha Christie. So she has that real genius for hooking people and making them feel they just have to read on and really want to.
Yes. I've got a question here that says, what do you think of the key elements of a Christie mystery? But perhaps those key elements are some of that, the extraordinary characters and the focusing on these immortal human characteristics of jealousy and
yeah, well, I mean, I think the sort of key components of what makes Christie so great and what her books offer. So one is, like we've talked about already, the super outlandish or impossible seeming plot hook that you cannot begin to theorize about, so you have to read on. I think her immense readability and unput down ability is unparalleled. Other key components of Christie novels, well, unpredictability. So her style, her writing style is very, very simple and engaging. And, you know, I first got hooked on her books when I was 12. And as a 12-year-old, I had no problem. I wasn't like, oh, this is complicated. I was like, I can follow this and be entertained by it. And yet at the age of 49, I can still read her books and think, this is simple in style, but it's really challenging, because you can never guess or predict where her plots are going. Very rarely. There's only one of her books where I guessed something. And all the others, you're like, okay, my attention keeps being drawn to all the clues, because that's something Poirot and Miss Marple do. They're so confident that they're cleverer than you, which I just love, that they will, especially Poirot, he will keep saying, think, mon ami, think about this, that, and then you'll work it all out. And Hastings will say, or Catchpole will say, no, I still haven't worked it out. But they're so confident that they tell you what the clues are, and you still don't get it. You still don't see where it's going. And that's an amazing talent, I think.
What do you think about the relationship between Hastings or Catchpole and, because do you find you have to be quite careful about the balance of not trying to make them too stupid and having some intelligence themselves? You know what I mean? It's quite an interesting...
Yeah. I mean, I don't write about... So I haven't put Hastings in any of my Poirot novels.
No.
Because I don't know why, I just thought I shouldn't do that. I invented Catchpole very much with Hastings in mind, however, because I wanted him... I thought, since I'm creating another and different sidekick for Poirot, I want him to be different from Hastings, because there's no point having Hastings 2.0. So I decided that rather than... I adore Hastings, but I think it's fair to say that he never makes any progress in his own detective abilities, even though he works with Poirot over and over again. And I thought, well, actually, I would like Catchpole to be a sidekick who is quite clever and is quite capable, and thought he was doing okay at the whole murder-solving lark until he encounters Poirot, and then he kind of goes, oh, maybe I'm a bit rubbish. This guy seems a bit better. So that's why in Monogram Murders, he's so grumpy, because he just feels so insecure the whole time. But then Poirot sees that he has potential and kind of wants him to improve. So from the start, I always thought that if I wrote more than one Poirot novel, and if I wrote a series, that there would be a kind of relationship of mentor and trainee, and that Catchpool would get gradually better and more able to detect because he's working with Poirot and learning from him all the time. So that's the sort of trajectory that they're on. And I mean, you probably didn't notice because you were trying to say Devonport instead of Davenport. But in The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, that's the first book where Catchpool is like, he's totally fine with the fact that Poirot is more of a genius than him.
Right, yeah.
He's much more relaxed. He's not in a strop about anything. He's much less uptight. So he's kind of, I feel as though in this book, they're settling into their relationship in a nice way.
Yes, I know what you mean. Excellent. And the final question of this section of many fans would like to know, can you share with us any of your favourite Agatha Christie stories and any of the mysteries that you particularly loved?
Yeah, so I have a whole range of favourites. Murder on the Orient Express is definitely one of my favourites. I think that has the cleverest solution of any detective novel I've ever read. I also love The Hollow, which is not a particularly famous Poirot novel, and it's certainly not one that many people say is their favourite, but I love that novel because it has the perfect balance between a brilliant mystery story and just a brilliant novel in its own right about a family and the relationships. And the characterization in that book is amazing. The plot is amazing. So I sort of feel as though for one of Christie's mature works, The Hollow is just a brilliant showcasing of everything she's so good at. So that's another favourite. And then I've got loads. I mean, I love Evil Under the Sun, which is the one where Poirot's on a seaside holiday and not massively enjoying it. But that is just one of the most ingenious Agatha Christie books ever. I'm very fond of 3-act tragedy. So I tend to like quite not the most famous ones, apart from Murder on the Orient Express, which I love.
Excellent. Which one is the one where it starts with the waitress bursting into the cafe while Poirot is waiting in your novels?
That is The Monogram Murders.
Yeah, that's my most memorable, sounds like it, isn't it? Most memorable and famous, brilliant scene is when he's sitting at the very beginning, exercising himself about the teapots and crockery not being lined up perfectly. Having a quiet moment, and then this waitress bursts in from nowhere, and you don't know why she's so a lady bursts in from nowhere. You don't know why she's so traumatized. You don't know what's going on, but she looks terribly upset about something, and then everything begins to unroll. That's a superb,
Oh, thank you.
Memorable scene that sets up the whole story. Good. Well, that's our boring interview questions out of the way. Can
I ask you a quick question?
Yes, of course, if everyone doesn't sign out. Yes, yeah.
When you're recording the audiobooks, obviously you're focusing on like recording and what you have to, your sort of acting role. Yeah. Are you able to follow the plot, or are you just thinking of one sentence at a time? So like when you get to the end, do you feel as though like you followed the story, or are you just focusing on, right, what do I have to say and how well can I say it?
No, it's a very interesting question actually, because it's quite a funny thing. You do need, contrary to the rumours, you do need to read the book before you record it. So I have read it slowly and carefully before.
You have to read it before you record it.
Can you believe that? So,
well, I mean, there's so every audio book you record, you have to not only read it then record it. That's like double the work, isn't it?
Well, I mean, there are many talented people who make audiobooks and make lots of them, and they do an enormous amount of work. They read the book and then they go back and they go through the whole book. You need to analyze all the characters, which voices are you going to give the characters, how do they behave. Some people like to mark the script up a lot with different colored pens and all kinds of stuff like that. I tend to just rely on my instinct a little bit more, just to go through it. But you have to read it. I'm a bit of a slow reader anyway, so I always read it slowly and carefully.
Yeah.
But then, yes, when you go back to it and you're actually recording it, I think things happen at once. You have to get lost in the plot and really into it. Otherwise, you can't commit to your reading of it. But at the same time, you have little antennae out about, have I said that right? Should I have done that? You know, oh, he whispered. Oh, did I really whisper that properly? Yes, she said, looking scared.
It's really, because I have recorded 2 audiobooks for, I wouldn't want to record any of my novels, but I've also written 2 self-help books. And for both of them, I was asked if I wanted to do the audiobook. And I was like, why not? And I thought, oh, this will be easy. But after like 2 days of being in that tiny room with the earphones on, I was like, blimey heck, that was exhausting. Like, you come out feeling like quite physically drained.
Well, I wouldn't want to exaggerate the first world problems of recording an audiobook, but yes, it is quite surprising. Anyone who's read a story, you know, to your kid before he goes to bed, and you sort of do that first 30 seconds, and then you do that terrible yawn, and it makes you feel really tired, and then eventually you break through that, and it's quite funny with an audiobook because you know. It's a bit like a marathon. You know you have to do it, and you've got to do it till 5 o'clock. So you have to break through that initial barrier, and then you get into some sort of grinding rhythm, and it goes on, and then you know, you get through the day. But you're absolutely right. I do walk out, and many people have said this. You do walk out at the end of the day feeling a bit dizzy and discombobulated from just sitting completely still reading for that length of time. It is quite strange. You come home and say you're tired, get a pretty scant look from my family, but
they don't know what we go through.
They don't know how we've suffered reading those excellent books all day long. Oh dear. Splendid. Perhaps now is the time, if anyone's still listening, to bring in our wonderful moderator, Corey, who's been listening in from behind the scenes. And I believe he's going to drop in a few of the questions that have been coming in from around the world.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you, Sophie, for an excellent talk. We have some great questions coming through already. Several of them ask about working with the Christie family and what that's like. Do you chat to them about plots and characters at all? Do they give any insight into her personality or her writing that maybe you found useful?
So we work together amazingly well. From the start, we've agreed about everything. We've always agreed about how the process should work, and everything I've suggested they've loved, and everything they've suggested I've loved. So it's been an incredibly happy and harmonious working relationship. We did things slightly differently for this particular book. So with the other 3, we followed exactly the same routine. I would have an idea. I would then flesh it out and send them a plan of the whole story. They would then, like a really detailed plan, like 100 pages, every single element of the book was in the plan. They would then look at that and make editorial suggestions and give feedback just based on the plan, which is super useful because anything that needs changing, if it's only at the planning stage, it's so much easier to change than if you've written it into the complete first draft of a book. So I would then go away and write the first draft, bearing their comments in mind, and their comments were always really helpful, and I could see straight away that they would improve the book if I did them. And so then I would give them the finalised first draft, and then they would make a few more editorial comments, but usually most of the editorial discussions would happen between the detailed plan and the finished first draft. And that was what we did for the first 3. And for the 4th one, for Kingfisher Hill, when I had this super duper idea that just all landed in my head completely complete, I thought, actually, I don't want to do a full plan and send it to the Christie family so that they know the ending already when they come to read the book. Because the one thing you can't do effectively, even in a detailed plan, is create the atmosphere and the suspense, because the plan's just in note form. So I thought, well, actually, wouldn't it be nice if Agatha Christie's family, who in a way are the most important people who need to like the book, wouldn't it be great if they could read the actual book and benefit from that feeling of mounting suspense because they don't know what the outcome's going to be. So I suggested we do it that way for this book, and they were very happy to do that. And so we did it that way. What I did was, for Kingfisher Hill, I wrote a 3-paragraph blurb that ended with ... that was really just a kind of description of all the intriguing things about the book, but with no answers at all. And they were like, that's intriguing. I was like, aha, now you have to wait for the whole thing. And that worked really well, but that was different from the way we'd always done it before.
Splendid.
Excellent. A couple of questions here too from participants asking or mentioning, I suppose, the differences between the original Christie Poirot books and your own is the length, and yours tends to be a bit longer. Is that something that just happens because of your writing style? Is it something that you think about when you're starting out from the outset of how long it will be, or is it just wherever the story takes you?
It is wherever the story takes me, and one of the amazing things about Agatha is she's so concise. When you read her books, not necessarily all of them, but in general, it's like there's no fat on the bones. It's all just necessary story from start to finish. And her style is really simple and economical. And I think my style is less like that. I'm slightly more elaborate and baroque, maybe by natural tendency. So I think my Poirot books would end up a bit longer than hers anyway, but we did discuss this before I wrote the first one. I discussed it with HarperCollins and with the Christies, and there was a strong feeling that readers of contemporary crime fiction would regard a book that was, say, 40,000 words, which some of Agatha's were, as just too short and not a proper novel. So I did have this idea before I started that maybe 70,000 words would be a better length. And very few of Agatha's novels were that long. So I think, I was told, I had that in mind as what the publishers thought would be a more ideal length. And I wonder whether as time goes on that will change, because everyone I know, not everyone, but like 98% of people I know are so busy that they don't know which way is up. And I think that the fashion will go more towards shorter books certainly in the immediate short term. But no, each book brings with it a certain number of characters, a certain number of plot points. So I basically just write the story the length that it feels like it should be. But I always overwrite. So my first draft is always 10 to 20,000 words longer than the book ends up. And then when I do the second draft, I go through it really strictly and cut out anything that isn't necessary. And that's actually one of the most fun stages. It feels like losing weight really easily, which is something I cannot do in real life. So like to be able to get a book and kind of go trimming it down, making it lean and economical is really satisfying.
I try and do that with my emails. I start with a ridiculously long email. Why have I written all that? I try and get it down to just writing, "Dear Sir, duly noted, best." But it's tough. It's very tough.
My literary agent is the absolute world's master of short emails. I always joke with him that every message he sends me, his iPhone contributes more words to the message than he does. Because his emails will typically say either yes or no, and then it'll say sent from my iPhone. I'm like, yet again, your phone has written more of this message than you have.
Yes, these short message people are all often in positions of great power and influence. It's the wafflers like me that end up sitting, waffling on their own at home. It's ridiculous. Sorry, Corey, you probably got more exciting questions from real people.
Yeah, the next one is for Sophie. The Poirot books are very different to your other crime and thrillers. Do you use a different process to write the Poirot novels, or is it the same?
Exactly the same process, and I agree that my Poirot novels are different on the surface. So if you read one of my contemporary crime novels and then a Poirot, they feel very different. Actually, beneath the surface, there's a lot of similarities. My most recent contemporary crime novel, which is called Haven't They Grown, starts with a woman who sees her ex-best friend, who she hasn't seen for 12 years. And this woman has her children with her. And when Beth, the narrator, last saw these children 12 years ago, they were 5 and 3 years old. And today, 12 years later, those children are still, apparently, 5 and 3 years old. They are no taller, they look no older, they're wearing the same clothes they were wearing 12 years ago when Beth last saw them. So, you know, hence the title, Haven't They Grown? Because they appear not to have grown. Now, the tone and the flavour is very different from the killings at Kingfisher Hill, but it's that same thing of, here is a really outlandish mystery, which surely cannot be happening, and yet it seems to be. What could be the explanation? So I think if people read my contemporary crime novels looking for the similarities with the way Agatha tells her stories, they would definitely find many similarities. It's just a surface massive difference that makes people not think along those lines.
A question for both Julian and Sophie. What's your thoughts on Kenneth Branagh's recent depiction of Poirot, and who is your favorite depiction of Poirot?
Well, I just love the fact that as a super fan of Poirot and of Agatha, I think most super fans have a kind of collector mentality. And I just like to collect all the Poirots, you know, starting with Albert Finney and then Peter Ustinov and then David Suchet, John Malkovich, Kenneth Branagh. The more people who play Poirot, the merrier. Although only Julian is ever allowed to play catchball. That's my rule that I'm laying down right now. I mean, in terms of who I see in my brain when I think about Poirot, it's still David Suchet. I think that's probably because he was the first Poirot that I got to know on screen. And I think it's hard to change your view of someone when you've got to know them as one person.
I'm going to go along with Sophie's excellent and diplomatic answer that it's very nice to see all these different people playing them. David Suchet is, of course, the sort of Google, Facebook monopoly of Poirot, so it's hard to get him out of your head. But I do have a very old school love of Peter Ustinov, who brought his brilliant wit and
he was really
pomposity to it. He was such a charismatic man, wasn't he? And I used to watch it with my...
yeah, he was brilliant. And some of the adaptations that he was Poirot in, like I think he did a version of Death on the Nile, didn't he? And that was amazing. That's one of my favourite Poirot adaptations. And I think he also did Evil Under the Sun. So yeah, he's amazing too. But David Suchet is who I see when I think of Poirot.
I haven't seen the Kenneth Branagh film, but I've seen clips. I know it's quite a massive, extreme version of it, but he is an amazing actor, so I'm sure he's done.
Yeah.
He's given it a lot of thought.
Oh yeah, no, he's brilliant. And the trailer has now been released for Death on the Nile, which is a new Hollywood Agatha movie, also Kenneth Branagh starring and directing. And the trailer for that looks amazing. As soon as I saw it, I was like, I want to see it in the cinema now.
Yeah.
It's difficult too, I suppose, when you're casting people who are, or actors who are already very, very famous in their own right. How do you get someone to see beyond the actor and the character itself? If that's something that was a thought possibly, or if it was something that was just, well, these are the greatest names that we can come up with for a film. So.
Yeah.
Next question is just about the character of Poirot, and what do you find irritating about him, and what do you like the most about him?
I don't find anything irritating about him at all. I genuinely don't. I don't think he puts a foot wrong. And even when he boasts about how he's cleverer than everyone, I think he's earned that because he is cleverer than everyone. And I think he does it in a quite charming way. I also love his tidiness and his orderliness because I really identify with that. There's a scene in, I think it's The Mysterious Affair at Styles, where he's in a room where objects on a mantelpiece have not been evenly spaced out. And so this turns out to be, I can't remember how, but it plays a part in the mechanics of the plot. But he cannot live with the fact that these objects are unevenly spaced out. And I strongly identify with that because I am exactly the same. In fact, every time I leave my house, when I come back, objects are in the wrong place because nobody else who lives here is as fanatical as me about tidiness. So I literally do a Poirot. I go around straightening the mantelpiece, and I have Persian rugs in quite a few rooms, and the tassels are always pointing in the wrong direction when I come back. So I have to like flip the rug back and flip it back over so the tassels all lie straight. So to me, that's just normal behaviour.
That may be the greatest insight we get about your life this evening, Sophie. And I'm waiting for a Poirot mystery called The Tasseled Rug, where that plays.
Ooh, the mystery of
an important
rug.
part.
That sounds more like a Poirot short story than a novel.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Brilliant.
A question for Julian about the sort of making of the audiobooks is how much interaction would you normally have with the author in terms of direction? Is there a director assigned to sort of coach you through the process as you're recording, or is it more your experience of the text that comes through the most?
Well, in many years of audiobooks, I have never ever had any connection with any of the authors. In fact, the first time I ever spoke to an author was a few weeks ago, actually, for the first time. So one of them got in touch because he was going to do something in his book in the middle of the audiobook. And talking to Sophie tonight. So normally the author is not directly involved. And then years ago when audiobooks started, there was always slightly more people involved. There was an engineer in charge of the technical recording. And then there was a dedicated producer, as they called them, more like what you would think of as a director. And they would play quite a large role. They would research the book. They'd look up all the pronunciations. They would have an idea about the text and how they'd like it to be recorded, and they would be there talking to you and correcting things and chivying you along throughout the recording. As the business has become much bigger with the advent of digital downloads and more lucrative and huge, the business has had to become rather streamlined. So now that's rather old school. There is there's a few wonderful people still making them in that way. I must mention Roy Macmillan at Penguin, who some of these great, all-knowing, superb, passionate, literate people who really know all about the book and know every word that's ever been pronounced. But in these modern digital streamlined days, things go a lot faster. So we usually have one person who's usually doubling up as the engineer. So they record the book and they're on hand to help with the pronunciations and any other little questions you might have as you go through. And for better or worse, the time scale that you have to record the books is a lot tighter. When I started off flapping around and hesitating and waffling through books for hours and hours, you could go back over lines again and again. But these days it has to be done pretty quick. And so you're looking at about 100 pages a day if you're gonna make a living. That is the end of my answer. I've almost forgotten the question.
I always imagined it would be like a recent comedy called Toast of London. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Matt Berry's character with an actor who...
Oh, yeah.
Genius.
I've seen one episode, but it's good. Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Through no end of hassle with his director and engineer and work.
Yeah.
Genius. Claude Fandango. I mean, that is so close to reality. I can't tell you. That is completely real. I've sat in those booths doing these voiceovers with 4 people sitting at the back, leafing through a copy of an achingly cool magazine and then looking up at the end, just very brief. Oh, it's superb. Yeah, it's too real. Sorry, next question.
Next question, Sophie. Assume that you've read all the Christie Poirot stories. How do you manage to not repeat anything already done by Christie?
I just, like anything she's already done, I just know not to do it because I do want to, like obviously Poirot is Agatha Christie's character and I'm writing about him. So I want to bring newness, otherwise there's no point. Like I don't just want to do Agatha's plots all over again. So I see it as my main job to come up with new and innovative cases for Poirot to solve. And I think because I know Agatha's oeuvre so well, anything she's done before, I just rule out. What I do allow myself to do, however, is kind of and I only realise I've ever done this once I've done it, but I quite like it when I construct my Poirot stories and then I notice that there's a sort of thematic echo. So in The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, the family at the centre of the story, the Devonport family, are, I think it's fair to say, pretty dysfunctional. And Agatha was an absolute expert at writing about dysfunctional families. In Appointment with Death, she writes about the Boynton family. In After the Funeral, she writes about the, oh, I can't remember the name of that family, but Cora's family, whatever they're called. And so I kind of, when I was writing The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, I was thinking, if I were putting this into a subcategory along with Agatha's Poirot novels, it would be in the dysfunctional families subcategory. So yeah, so I noticed that, you know, there are certain echoes and there are plot echoes. Like, for example, The Mystery of Three Quarters prominently features two dogs in the story. Dogs are actually quite important to the plot of The Mystery of Three Quarters. And in Agatha's book, Dumb Witness, there is a dog called Bob who is central to the plot. So things like that, I like to sort of consciously echo, but in terms of actual plot devices, I mean, the plot device that Agatha uses at the end of Death on the Nile, which she also kind of used in Styles, I would regard that as not an option for me because she has covered that so exhaustively, that particular way of resolving a mystery.
Excellent. We have participant Becky asks, I'm growing very fond of Catchpool, in particular his dry yet kind style and approach. How did you go about forming his character and backstory?
Well, now he just feels like a real character to me. But initially, what I did was I decided I wanted him to be a Scotland Yard inspector. And I think I kind of thought, how would I feel? What would I do and say if I were a Scotland Yard inspector working with Poirot? And so I think he was kind of my most neurotic inner self when he started. But then as the book's developed, he's kind of become his own person. And I mean, I really like him. And I do notice that readers really notice him. And I get so many emails from people saying they love Catchpool, but I also get quite a lot of emails from readers saying, can't Catchpool be more like this? And can't he? I think some people get impatient with him because they think he should sort of buck up in some respects. But the whole point of him is that he's unable to, you know, he can't come out of his shell in all the ways that he would like to because he's a police inspector in 1931. And so he just can't. And he's got a very bossy and domineering mother who doesn't play a very large role at all, but is always looming in the background. And so he's kind of a little bit stifled in some ways. And that's just his life situation. And I think he's being very good about it and handling it as best he can. So but you see, I don't have this thing. So many people will say, oh, such and such a character in such and such a book is an unsympathetic character. You hear that all the time. And I don't feel that way about any characters. So even my murderer characters, like in The Killings at Kingfisher Hill, although I obviously disapprove of all the murders that are committed, I don't think about those murderer characters and kind of go, they're bad, they're evil. Like, I think, you know, desperate situations can make good people do terrible things. So I try and actually, well, I don't even have to try. I naturally have sympathy for all my characters, even the ones who've done terrible things.
Thank you, Sophie. I'm aware of the time, so I think maybe we have time for two more questions.
Excellent.
The first one is, you have a few projects on the go at once, like Poirot and then Waterhouse and Zayler. How do you decide which ones takes priority?
Well, none of them they all take equal priority, and it's just a question of dividing my time so that I know when I'm going to be writing one and when I'm going to be writing the other. And I also, write self-help books, and I run a self-help podcast. I teach, I'm the course director of the Crime and Thriller Master's Programme at Cambridge University. I run a coaching programme for writers called Dream Author, where I help writers to achieve the maximum happiness and success that they can. So I've actually got like 5 or 6 different strands to what I do, and I prioritise all of them. I just have to like allocate different pockets of time to each one. The weird thing is, whenever I have a new idea for a crime novel, I know which it is. I don't think I've ever had to think, oh, should I give this to Simon Waterhouse, my contemporary detective, or should I assign this case to Poirot? The ideas seem to come clearly labelled with who they are for. So I've never had to think, what kind of book is this? And again, I think it's just my imagination is now in the habit of producing ideas, and it now knows that it has to produce Poirot ideas and contemporary ideas, and so it just does.
And the final question is, has there been any interest in making your Poirot novels into television or films?
I mean, not that I'm aware of, but I don't know. I mean, there might be people out there who are thinking about it, but I think my Poirot novels coincided with film and TV people rediscovering Agatha and thinking they wanted to do all her stories again. So there's been a massive increase in, these Hollywood movies with Kenneth Branagh and the BBC adaptations. There's just a strong desire to do Agatha's books again for the screen. And I think that is obviously going to take priority. So I don't think anyone has thought about mine in that light yet, as far as I know. And actually, I'm okay with that. I think I have had 2 of my contemporary crime novels made for TV. And while it was a fascinating experience, it is kind of a mixed blessing. So I'm very happy for them to be books and audiobooks, and stop there.
Well, there's a lot of interest in our Q&As and chats for TV and film adaptations of your books, so fingers crossed. With that, I think I can draw the Q&A session to an end. Thanks to everyone for their questions.
Can you hear my dog in the background?
Just wanted to thank you, Sophie and Julian, for taking the time to answer questions.